Welcome to part 1 of our series, How a Small Island Began a Global Empire. Before it ruled a quarter of the world, England was just a small, vulnerable island. It was geographically isolated and often politically vulnerable against larger continental powers. So, how exactly did this small, vulnerable island begin building the largest empire in history? To understand England's rise, we must first look at Europe in the Age of Exploration. In the 16th century, the global stage was dominated by Spain and Portugal, who controlled the most lucrative trade routes and earliest colonies. England entered the game late. Unable to compete directly with the major naval powers, they resorted to state-sponsored piracy, using privateers like Sir Francis Drake to raid Spanish treasure fleets. With a thirst for overseas wealth, England turned its focus to establishing permanent footholds in the New World. However, their first efforts were often clumsy and failed. The fate of the Roanoke colony remains a famous mystery, illustrating the massive challenges of early settlement. The first successful English settlement was Jamestown in 1607. It nearly collapsed due to disease and starvation, but ultimately survived, driven by the cash crop of tobacco. The survival of Jamestown unlocked the next phase of expansion, focused on securing wealth-generating territories. The Caribbean islands became pivotal, where lucrative sugar plantations generated immense wealth, sadly fueled entirely by the brutal system of chattel slavery. Simultaneously, the East India Company began its slow, strategic expansion in India, initially as a purely commercial trading entity. Over time, through treaties and military victories, the East India Company's influence morphed from simple trade into direct political and administrative control over vast territories. This early empire was built on a foundation of precarious beginnings and relentless ambition. The key theme here is that the empire began as trade and experimentation, driven by competition and the sheer necessity of survival rather than immediate domination. But this still fragile network of colonies and trade routes was about to be severely tested in a global conflict that would reshape the entire world. Welcome back. In this part, we explore the turbulent period of war and revolution that fundamentally reshaped the British Empire. Our story begins with a dramatic hook. One war turned Britain into the world's dominant power, and another nearly destroyed its empire. The first conflict was the 7 Years' War, often considered the first true global conflict. This massive conflict saw Britain defeat its longtime rival, France, decisively removing them from many key territories. This victory propelled Britain to a level of global dominance unmatched by any other European power. Crucially, Britain gained vast territories in North America, including Canada, and cemented its influence over India. However, this newfound dominance came at a steep price, leading directly to the next great crisis, the American Revolution. To fund the recent war, Britain imposed rising taxes on its American colonies, sparking immense colonial unrest and the cry of "no taxation without representation." By 1776, the colonies declared independence, and Britain suffered the devastating loss of its 13 most prosperous North American possessions. The loss was an enormous shock to the British Empire, prompting a major reassessment of its global strategy. Instead of abandoning the imperial project, Britain executed a crucial strategic pivot. The focus shifted dramatically away from the Americas towards strengthening power in India, Asia, and expanding influence into Africa. This new direction also saw the establishment of Australia as a penal colony, marking a new chapter of imperial expansion in the Pacific. The key lesson here is the empire's ability to adapt after a major failure. The empire survived not by holding on to past mistakes, but by radically changing direction and finding new avenues for power and wealth. Instead of collapsing, Britain rebuilt stronger than ever, powered by something new: industry. Welcome back. We are now entering the period often referred to as the zenith of British imperial power. By the 1800s, Britain wasn't just a country. It had positioned itself as the undisputed center of a global system. This global system was orchestrated from London, dictating trade, politics, and culture across every continent. This era marks the peak of British power, driven by economic superiority and military might, setting the stage for global domination. The foundation of this immense power was the Industrial Revolution, which gave Britain an insurmountable economic lead. Factories churned out goods at an unprecedented rate, fueling a production boom that solidified Britain's trade dominance across the world. This trade dominance was protected by the unparalleled strength of the Royal Navy, ensuring British goods and influence flowed freely everywhere. At the heart of the empire was India, known as the, quote, jewel in the crown, which provided enormous wealth and resources to the British Raj. The British invested in extensive infrastructure in India, building railways and ports that were crucial for resource extraction and military control. However, this infrastructure primarily facilitated the systematic exploitation of Indian resources and labor, prioritizing British imperial interests. Beyond India, the 1800s saw a renewed period of aggressive territorial expansion worldwide. The scramble for Africa was a rapid and often brutal colonization effort, where Britain carved out vast territories for its empire. Crucially, Britain secured control over key global bottlenecks like the Suez Canal, ensuring swift passage between Europe and Asia and maintaining trade dominance. Despite the appearance of unified strength, the empire was characterized by deep internal contradictions. The immense wealth generated in Britain was directly dependent on the forceful exploitation of resources and labor in its colonies. This period was defined by peak global control, existing in uncomfortable tension with the deep moral and ethical contradictions inherent in colonial exploitation. The British Empire seemed invincible, a structure of global reach that dominated the map. It was truly the empire upon which, famously, the sun never set, encompassing nearly a quarter of the world's population. But the larger the empire grew, and the more complex its structure became, the harder it became to truly control, setting the stage for future challenges. Welcome back to our series on the rise and fall of the British Empire. This is part 4, the beginning of the end. We are now moving into the pivotal period of the 20th century, where the immense structure of the British Empire began its rapid, irreversible collapse. The two world wars didn't just change the map of Europe, they fundamentally broke the British Empire. The First World War was the first seismic shock. While Britain emerged victorious, the victory came at a crippling cost to the empire's foundation. Financially, the Great War exhausted the British treasury. The nation transitioned from the world's leading creditor to a significant debtor, fundamentally altering its ability to project power. Crucially, the war heavily relied on vast numbers of colonial troops and resources, demanding sacrifices from subjects who were promised little in return. Serving in the trenches or supplying the war machine increased global awareness in the colonies, leading to a rising tide of political organization and demands for self-determination. Just 2 decades later, the Second World War delivered the fatal blow, exposing the empire's weaknesses on an unprecedented scale. Britain finished World War II financially devastated and heavily reliant on American aid, incapable of footing the bill for maintaining its vast overseas commitments. Militarily, the country was drained. The sheer cost and complexity of policing and administering an empire that spanned the globe became entirely unsustainable. With Britain looking weaker than ever, internal pressure for self-rule exploded. Nationalist leaders saw the moment to push their demands to fruition. The post-war world was defined not just by Britain's weakness, but by a new international order that opposed colonialism. The new global superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, both fundamentally opposed traditional European colonialism, albeit for different ideological reasons. The international climate had shifted decisively against imperial rule, putting immense diplomatic pressure on Britain to relinquish its colonies. All these pressures culminated in 1947 with the watershed moment, the independence and partition of India. India's freedom was the most significant turning point in the history of the decolonization movement. It symbolized the end of British authority in Asia and proved that even the crown jewel of the empire could not be held any longer. The story of the British Empire's collapse is a complex interplay of post-war exhaustion and the rise of new global powers. Remember, empires don't just fall. They unravel under the combined, relentless pressure of internal resistance and external global forces. As the empire began to collapse, a new world was taking shape. If you've enjoyed this journey so far, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into history. After India, the rest of the empire began to slip away, a topic we will explore in the next and final part of our series. Welcome to the final chapter of our deep dive into the British Empire. In this segment, we examine the dramatic collapse of the empire and its profound, lasting legacy on the world we inhabit. In just decades, the largest empire in history disappeared. The speed of the decline was astonishing. we'll cover the rapid decolonization process, the symbolic final moments, and how the empire's policies continue to shape global affairs, both positively and negatively. The 20th century, particularly after World War II, ushered in the unstoppable era of decolonization. From India to Ghana, nations across Africa, the Caribbean, and Asia rapidly gained independence, fundamentally redrawing the world map. The emotional handover of Hong Kong to China in 1997 is often cited as the definitive symbolic end of the British Empire. Yet, the connections did not vanish entirely. Many former territories transitioned into the Commonwealth of Nations. The Commonwealth is a voluntary association of 56 independent member states, maintaining ties through shared history, values, and goals of development and democracy. Now, let's confront the enduring legacy of the empire, starting with some of the most difficult consequences. The borders drawn arbitrarily by imperial powers, ignoring ethnic and religious lines, continue to fuel numerous modern conflicts and political instability today. Furthermore, the extractive economic policies of the colonial era established deep-seated economic inequalities that persist between the former colonizer and the colonized. However, the legacy is not solely negative. The empire also forged complex global connections that shaped modern culture. Perhaps the most visible legacy is the English language, which remains a primary language of international business, science, and digital communication. The movement of people, goods, and ideas created immense cultural exchange, influencing everything from food and music to literature and political systems around the globe. The story of the British Empire is one of immense power, rapid decline, and an undeniable impact. The empire is gone, but its economic, political, and cultural impact remains everywhere you look. The British Empire didn't just shape history, it shaped the modern world. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more updates and deep dives into history.